Welcome to another episode of the Daily Wellness Podcast. Today, I'm going to answer one of the most common questions that I get from podcast listeners and social media followers, and that is, how do I teach my kids about healthy food? I thought it made sense to give the answer to that question a permanent spot in the podcast lineup. Today is a pretty short and sweet episode. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Daily Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Meredith. I've led my family on a transformative health journey for over a decade, and now I help other families do the same. So this is a place where you can learn about healthy living and take the next step in your wellness journey. Today I'm answering the question, how do I teach my kids about healthy food? And I love this question because it means that you're thinking about not just feeding your kids healthy food, but teaching them why you're feeding them healthy food, why it's important for them to eat healthy food. And if they can understand the answer to that question, it can impact their health positively for the rest of their lives. So a couple of clarifying things before I give you some practical ideas. One is that you don't need any kind of degree in nutrition or health and wellness or anything like that to be able to teach your kids about healthy food. Honestly, a lot of this is just common sense, and all it takes is a little intentionality. Another thing I want to clarify is just terminology. So I'm talking about how to teach your kids about healthy food. Well, what does healthy food mean? When I say healthy food, I'm not talking about some kind of trendy diet or favoring one of those trendy diets over another. I'm just talking about real food, and that will become more clear as I give you these ideas and talk about how to teach your kids. But I just want to clarify what I mean by healthy because a lot of people have a different definition of what healthy is. So just to simplify, what is in my mind when I say healthy food is just real food. I think when you're teaching your kids about healthy food, it really depends on how old your kids are. So your approach is going to depend a little bit on their age and their ability to understand different concepts, right? And that makes sense. So we're going to talk about several different things here, and some of these will apply more to younger kids, and some of them will apply to older kids. Or if you have younger kids, then you'll spend more time talking about some of the things that apply to them and make sense to them. And if you're talking about older kids, maybe you'll use all of these ideas that I'm going to give you, but some of them they will get instantly in one conversation and you won't have to go on and on about it. And you can just move on to the next thing. But no matter where your kids are at, it is not too late to teach them about healthy food and the benefits of it. In fact, I would say the opposite. It is never too late to teach your kids. And I do think as parents, we do have a responsibility to teach our kids about healthy food because honestly, no one else is. They're not going to learn about this in school. They're not going to learn about it watching TV or on social media unless they're following, the right people on social media, which most teenagers aren't. And there's a lot of conflicting information about there. So you can be the expert on this subject for your children, even if you're not technically an expert by certifications or whatnot. But this is something that you guys can actually learn about together if it's all new to you as well. So don't be intimidated by it. It's all very easy, and just be intentional. My first idea is to teach them the difference between what God made and what man made. So when we started our health journey and really started looking at the foods that we were eating and changing our diet to really a whole foods, real food-based diet in our home, our kids were pretty little. So I had to think of ways to kind of explain our choices in a way that made sense to them. And that is really the best, easiest, clearest way that I could think of to explain it to them. And they really got it. I mean, this is something that kids get. So when you look at a food, it's pretty easy to say, did God make this or did man make this? And foods that God made are foods that don't really have any other ingredients besides the food. So that's one main thing. You can think about food that God made as something that you could go and pick out of your garden or pick from a tree or came from an animal, right? An example of that would be You could show them an apple and they could say, you could ask them, did God make this or did man make this, right? And give them those ideas like, well, yeah, God made the tree and therefore God made the fruit that came from the tree. It's pretty fascinating to see kids make those connections so quickly. So they'll be able to understand that fruits and vegetables and meat and dairy products that came straight from a cow, like all of those are foods that God made. And it's so fun to have those conversations. There are a few things that might be confusing for them that you guys can talk through, such as cheese. Cheese didn't exactly come straight from a cow, right? People had to take the milk from the cow, add a culture, add some salt, and then make the cheese from those ingredients. So as they get a little bit older, you can explain that, all of those ingredients are natural. They're things that God made, and people just put those things together to create a new product out of things that God made. And it's really the difference between a processed food. Cheese is a processed food, but it's not an ultra-processed food. And ultra-processed foods are the foods that we're trying to avoid. So as they get older, you can use that terminology. But before then, you can just kind of simply explain that, yeah, it does have a few ingredients in it. And people had to take those ingredients and mix them together to make something, right? But it's kind of like a fruit salad. A fruit salad could be technically called a processed food because people had to take the fruit, they had to cut it all up, they had to put it in a bowl and stir it together, right? But obviously it's still very healthy. The ingredients are still things that God made. And so you could start to explain that when you think your kids are old enough to understand it, but it's amazing how quickly they catch on. So simply, the first idea is to explain foods as, instead of healthy or unhealthy, just to use the terminology that these are foods that God made and these are foods that man made. And that will give a lot of clarity. The second idea that I have used with my kiddos to teach them about healthy food is just to connect them to where their food comes from. There are a lot of ways that you can do this. You can grow your own food. And I started with a little tiny 4x4 raised garden bed when my kids were pretty little, and they got to see, even though they didn't help very much when they were tiny, they got to see that food grow. They knew that it came from the ground, from a plant. They got to pick the food. They got to harvest the food, clean it, wash it, cut it up. And it was a direct connection to those things that I had been teaching them about food that God made. But thankfully, growing a garden or, even a container garden is not necessary to teach your kids about where food comes from if that's not your thing. Even though I think it's great and you should listen to my podcast about starting a garden, you don't have to. There are lots of ways that you can connect your kids to where their food comes from without growing it yourself if that's not something you're interested in. I remember when, again, our kids were little, we were starting this journey. We started to buy more food at the farmer's market. And there was a lady there who sold some fruits and veggies, but she had milk. So we would buy our milk from her. And she had this really great, low temp pasteurized milk, which was the best option I could find at the time. And come to find out, she would have farm days. And her farm wasn't too far from where we lived, which was amazing. I think it would still be worth driving to, even if it was a little farther. But she would have these farm days where she would invite people out to her farm, and we could see the cows that produced the milk that we were buying. We could see all of her goats and feed them. Sometimes we got to bottle feed them. We got to see her sheep and all of the ways that she takes care of them, and a sheepdog demonstration. We got to see her chickens and her vegetable garden. And my kids loved that. They loved seeing those animals. Of course, we had lots of conversations on the way home about the purpose of those animals and how they provided food for people. And that was just a really fun connection to food for my kids. So that would be a great option if you have the chance to visit a local farmer once in a while, and whether it's, vegetable farming or animal farming, I would say pick someone that's doing a good job of raising their animals, and make sure that you're supporting them. And a good way to find those people is the farmer's market. So if you have a farmer's market near you, or maybe you can go online if you can't go to the farmer's market, and you can see what vendors are at the farmer's market through a Facebook page. And you could contact the local farmers that way and say, hey, do you have any days where people can come and visit your farm? Or do you have days where you don't mind us coming and having our own little field trip there? And in my experience, the farmers love that. They love talking about things that they are passionate about, and especially showing kids the work that they do. Another fun thing that my family is kind of a tradition for us now, I would say, is to visit You Pick farms. So in the spring, we will find a strawberry patch because I don't grow strawberries. So we go and stock up on strawberries and eat lots of strawberries as we pick. Thankfully, they don't mind that. And another thing we do toward the end of the summer is go to a blueberry patch. And then when we lived in the South, because we don't have them too much here in the Midwest in our area, is go to an apple orchard. And it was so fun to try all the varieties of apples and pick them ourselves and go home and make things with the apples. But if you can find a You Pick orchard, another option would be a pumpkin patch. Those are super popular in our area. But any of those, you could go and take your kids and they get to actually pick the food that they bring home. That's such a great learning experience for them about where their food comes from, how it grows. Another in their face demonstration of God making food. And you could talk about the benefits of that food. And I know some of you are busy and you're like, Melissa, do not give me another thing to put on my schedule. But guys, this is such a fun thing to do. And it doesn't have to be very often, maybe even just twice a year. Try to think of a couple things that you can go do, make some great family memories, and just connect your kids to where their food comes from. My third idea is to take your kids to the store with you when you're grocery shopping. Now, I have 4 kids, and when they were little, it was not the most fun thing to take 4 little kids to the grocery store with me. So I'm not going to suggest that you take a whole bunch of little kids to the grocery store with you, because there's not going to be much teaching that happens other than, stay behind me, touch the cart, and things like that. So you're not going to be able to teach them much about food. But if you have the opportunity to take one kiddo with you, while the rest stay at home with dad or grandma or whatever, then those opportunities can be really special and super informative for your kiddos. Again, you don't have to take a kiddo with you every time to the grocery store. And I know a lot of us are doing grocery pickup and grocery delivery, which is a godsend because I did not have that when my kids were babies and toddlers. So I'm a little jealous of you moms that do. But as you have the opportunity, all right, I know this is not going to be the most convenient thing for you. It's easier just to run in and run out by yourself. But think about the benefit that it can have on your kiddo's life and their understanding about healthy food to go into the store with you and watch you shop. If you think about it, shopping for healthy food, understanding where the healthy food is in the store, that's going to be a huge life skill for them, right? They're going to have to do this someday on their own. And if you can start to talk them through that, then they'll automatically know when they're out on their own, okay, this is where I find the healthy food. This is the difference. This is how I identify healthy food and not healthy food, or real food and not real food. And, they need to be at an age where they can kind of start to understand some of those concepts. If they're little, then you're walking around the grocery store with them. Maybe they're sitting in the cart even at this point still. And you're being like, oh, remember how we talk about at home that the food we want to eat the most of is food that God made? Where do you see food that God made in the store? And it never fails that they're going to pick out something that's marketed to children that is, not a real food option. And so you get to have that conversation with them about making healthy choices. So I remember, we had just been to a birthday party and I let my kids have birthday cake there. That's something I feel very comfortable with them doing. Occasionally having birthday cake at a birthday party is not a big deal to me, but it's definitely not a real food. not a food that God made. And so we went to the grocery store after that. One of the kids wanted to buy I can't remember if it was, honestly, 'cause it's been a while, if it was ice cream or cereal, but it was something, again, that man made. And so I got to kind of have that conversation with them. It's like, do you remember going to the birthday party earlier and you had birthday cake? Yes, they remembered that. What do you think that cake was? Do you think it was something that God made or something that man made? We eventually got to the point where they understood that that was something that man made. All the ingredients in that cake, definitely a man-made item. And then the food that they wanted, we had the same conversation, right? Is this something that God made or something that man made? And eventually we got to the point where they understood, oh, this is also something that man made. And because of the conversations we had prior, they knew that the foods we want to eat the most of are foods that God made. And the foods that we want to eat just occasionally, not too often, or else we're not going to feel very good, are the foods that man made. Those are the kind of conversations that you can have in the store with your kids, even when they're young. And those conversations change a little bit when they're older, because they'll be able to understand that very quickly. And then the conversation can be a little bit more detailed. Or like, do you think we should buy this food, Mom? Let's read the ingredients together. That's a huge skill that they can learn at the grocery store. One of the most important things that you can learn as an adult as well is to read the ingredients on the package. Don't read the front of the box. Don't read the nutrition label first. First thing you need to do is read the ingredient label. And my kids know this right away. If there's something they want, sometimes they forget and they'll be like, Mom, can we buy this? And I'd be like, have you read the ingredients? And once they read the ingredients, they will know right away what Mom is going to say, because they know how to look at that ingredient label and know if it's a real food or not. The ingredient label lets us know if that item is an ultra-processed food or not. If it's an ultra-processed food, it's going to have highly processed ingredients like white flour, white sugar, a bunch of syrups. It's going to have ingredients on there sometimes that you can't pronounce. That's a big red flag. It's going to have ingredients on there that you don't have in your own kitchen at home, right? So if it's something that you wouldn't buy and cook with at home, it's not something that we should be buying very often at the grocery store. Something that we should buy very seldomly, okay? And that is a big thing that we can teach our kids, that when we're heading to the checkout line, our grocery cart should be filled with mostly foods that God made. It should be filled with mostly real foods that are going to nourish our bodies, make us feel good, right? And they can see us walking to the grocery checkout with a cart like that. They're going to know, like, this is the way to do it. And another skill for them to learn at the grocery store is where the real food is at. Most of the real food, the food that God made at the grocery store, is around the perimeter of the grocery store. You think of the produce section, the meat and egg section, the dairy section, and then, you're going to find some things in the frozen foods, or maybe a whole grain pasta or a sprouted or sourdough bread, if you're lucky at your grocery store. Those things might be in the aisles, but for the majority, your grocery cart should be full of the things that God made from the perimeter of the store. If your grocery cart is filled with a bunch of boxes and packaged items from the middle of the store, then you're not really eating a whole food or real food-based diet. So just to review, so far we had teaching them what God made versus what man made. We have connecting your kids to where their food comes from. And third is taking them to the store and teaching them all of the things that they can learn with you at the store. My last idea that I'll share here is to talk about the benefits of real food or food that God made with them. This is definitely something that applies probably more to older kids. I mean, my youngest is 9 at this time of recording, and these are conversations I can definitely have with her. So just depends on your kiddo. 7, 8, 9, you can definitely talk about the benefits of real food. I have actually a connection for you to a book series that talks about this. It's a super fun kids book series that talks about the benefits of real food. It's called My Superhero Foods, and it talks about what benefit different foods give their kids. So if they want more energy or if they need to grow strong, and I'll link those in the show notes for you because it's a super fun way for younger kids to learn about the benefits of real food. But those kinds of conversations definitely get more detailed as your kiddos get older. And honestly, it is such fun conversation to have. It's a very normal thing for me to sit around the dinner table with my 17-year-old, my two 14-year-olds, and my 9-year-old now. And we've been doing this for several years. You don't have to wait until they're that old. But for me to ask, okay, guys, we're having steak tonight. What benefits is this steak providing for you? What nutrients does it have? And they'll start saying like, oh, this has protein in it. That's right. It does have protein. That's one of the main macronutrients in steak. And what benefit does protein give to you? And they'll talk about that, somebody will come up with one idea, somebody will come up with another idea. And then I'll say, can you think of any other nutrients that steak is giving you? And eventually, maybe they don't think of it, I mention it, or maybe someone does, is that it provides healthy fat because it is a quality protein. It's a grass-fed steak. So it has nice, healthy fat in it for you. What does healthy fat do for you? Oh, it helps our brains to grow. It gives us strong cell walls. That's right. And then maybe we'll move on to something else on our plate. Maybe it's a whole grain, maybe it's a vegetable. And I'm not kidding. Those conversations have been amazing because I have seen my kids' understanding of the benefits of real food grow so much. And sometimes I don't know it all. I don't remember it all. Sometimes I Google it. I'm sitting there like, I really don't remember all the benefits of this asparagus. And so I'm going to look it up and see, what vitamins exactly does it have in it. So that's really fun learning experience for me as well. And rarely does a real food just have one benefit. That's a really neat understanding is if you only know of one nutrient benefit in that food, go ahead and Google it really quick while you guys are sitting there. That's one way that I allow phone use at the table is if we're looking up the benefits of a real food. But it's amazing how if God made, thinking back to our connection to real food being foods that God made, man, when you start looking at the nutrient profile of your foods, it is never just one benefit. God builds so many benefits into each and every real food. And it kind of starts to feel like eating this real food is such a good thing. It's such a blessing to be able to sit at a table with a plate in front of me that is full of nutrient-dense real food that God made. And I think my kids really start to gain an appreciation, probably from all of these things, understanding that God made it, connecting it to where it was grown and the farmers that took such care to grow it, taking them to the store and understanding that there are a lot of options, but this is what our family chose to bring home. And then as we talk about the benefits of it, they start to see all the nutrient benefits in these foods. And they start to feel like, wow, I am so glad that I am eating this right now. So in our home, we try to shoot for eating, nutrient-dense real food that God made 80% of the time, and mostly that's at home. And sometimes when we're out of our home, we're eating out, we're getting an, ice cream cone or something like that. We're not eating perfectly, but that's not the point. The point is to make progress and have at least 80% of your diet be real food that God made that's providing nutrition to your body, because that's the way God made us. He made us to eat real food, and when we do, we thrive. And that's a connection your kids will start to make, that as they choose to eat real food, they're gonna feel better. They're gonna feel their best. I hope this episode was helpful for you. I hope it gives you some fun ideas no matter how old your kids are. I hope it gives you motivation to start being intentional about those conversations. None of these are hard things. And like I said, none of them require you to have any kind of certification in nutrition. It's just you being mindful of your conversations, of the choices that you're making, and really giving your kids the benefit of learning about healthy food so that they can take those skills and that knowledge into their adult life, and it can benefit them for the rest of their lives. If you did enjoy this episode, if you found it helpful, I would love to hear from you and get your feedback. Let me know what other topics you want me to talk about. And also, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to leave a review. That helps our podcast grow, and we just appreciate it so very much. We love hearing those reviews from you guys. Thanks for listening to today's episode on the Daily Wellness Podcast. We hope that you found it helpful for your own wellness journey. And if so, we'd love for you to leave a review. Then come back and listen for review shoutouts on upcoming episodes. For more information, check out the show notes and connect with us on our website, dailywellnesscommunity.com.